Good evening. Welcome to St. John's as we celebrate this 150th anniversary of this part of the church. So it's a good idea you all sat in it, because this is the bit we're celebrating. I'd also like to welcome our extended choir here from several other churches and friends who've joined in, and our organist for this evening, Simon Harvey, as Barry, our usual organist, will be conducting, and of course our narrator, Alistair Daniel. So here we go. Thank you.
Although the title of this first bit of narration is, I have to check my notes here, 1848 and the most lamentable restoration, that date of 1848 marks the end of this little bit of the story. Because this church has a past going back a long way before the 1840s. Malden means the sign or the cross on the hill. And people would have used that wooden cross on this hill when travelling between Epsom and Kingston as a sign that they were on the right route. And as for the church, well, I'm going to step this way. It's going to upset Franklin because I told him I was going to be over there. Sorry, Franklin. Because I want you now, those of you who are sitting, as Millie said, very conveniently in the Victorian part of the church, I want you to imagine actually that you're sitting on grass. Because actually the church stopped where that wall was. In fact, that wall wasn't there because the Saxon church that predated this one over here, what we now call the Lady Chapel in the South Aisle here, the Saxon church was built out of flint and stone, and you can still see remnants of the Saxon church round the chancel and the lower part of the chancel walls. It would have been completely recognizable as a church, chancel, nave, and tower. But, and I'm going to move into that Saxon church now, it would be darker. Narrow windows, thicker glass, glass tinted blue-green, which would affect the light in the church. Perhaps there was some stained glass, because Saxon churches sometimes had stained glass. We don't know when it was built, but we do know that it was recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086. In the late 12th century, and I need to say, those of you who are from St. John's will know that I'm a professional storyteller. I normally do not have bits of paper in my hand. If you've listened to me tell stories, you may have noticed I never tell stories with dates or names in. I have a slight problem with dates and names, so I'm afraid I'm glued to these pieces of paper. But in the late 12th century, this church was awarded to Merton Priory. And if you want to see the remains of Merton Priory, a very important priory in this part of England, then you need to go to the Saver Centre and look under the car park in Wimbledon. The remains of the chapter house there of Merton Abbey. So this was awarded to Merton Abbey, and a lawyer who worked for Merton Abbey bought the he became Lord of the Manor. He bought the manor. And that person was Walter de Merton. And Walter de Merton rose to become Chancellor, Lord Chancellor of England under Henry III and Edward I. Later, he became the Bishop of Rochester. Now, the reason that I'm going into this history is because actually Walter de Merton's really important for us here, because in 1260 he founded a house of scholars just outside that wall. Where the manor house is built, the manor house is built on the footprint of an earlier manor house that was Walter de Merton's manor house, where he established a house of scholars that was there to finance, and I talk about nepotism, this was to finance the education of his nephew in Oxford. So it was from this building next to us that Merton College was founded in 1274. And Merton College remains the owner of the manor and the patron of this parish. So Father Michael was appointed by Merton College to this parish. And like every ancient parish in this country, it has seen tumultuous events through history. And the 1260s were dominated by the war, the Second Barons' War. And this is relevant again for Walter de Merton because he was on the king's side, and of course this was his parish. So this parish was occupied for 6 months by a mob. I know, shame, isn't it? They occupied this place, and it's all very distant, isn't it? It's about kings and barons, but we have to remember this was a settlement of ordinary people. And while we tell the history of kings and barons and Lord Chancellors and bishops, Those ordinary people of Malden would have had to live through the occupation of their parish by an angry mob for 6 months. The Black Death touched this parish. During the Black Death, at least 25% of the population of England died. Over 25%. And the vicar was appointed in 1349, Walter de Wavendine. Have I got that right? Pat, where's Pat? Have I said that right, Pat? Will that do? I don't know where she is. Is that all right, Pat? Is that okay? Okay, thanks. I did say to Pat she was only allowed in if she promised not to shout, "That's wrong!" at any point during what I'm saying. So Walter de Wavendine was appointed in 1349, but then John Whaleys was appointed in 1350. So it doesn't take much guessing to work out what happened to poor Walter de Wavendine at the height of the Black Death. So all of these things touched us. And of course, in the 16th century, one of the most tumultuous changes for this parish, as every parish in England, would have been the Reformation. In 1549, the English Bible was heard for the first time in this church. Up until then, everything had been in Latin. But at the same time, this church was also coping with the fact that it was going to ruin. By the 1550s, this church was in a poor state, and in 1585 an appeal was made for money, no effect whatsoever. In 1596, the villagers petitioned Gloriana, Elizabeth I. Now, again, that may sound distant. Elizabeth I, Queen of England, up there in Westminster, up there in London? No, because her favourite palace was Nonsuch. We were her neighbours. Nonsuch Palace was in Cheam. We were down the road. So, of course, she was generous to the parish and gave what we would expect her to give. Absolutely nothing. So by the end of Elizabeth's reign, the church was virtually in ruins. And the talk was no longer of repair, but rebuild. So in 1609, plans were made, and the rebuild was completed by 1611, which is why we have the remains of the Saxon church round the end of the chancel, and then the red brick church as you see it today, with the rebuilding of the chancel, and then the nave and the new tower. So this is the 17th century building, which was funded by the Lord of the Manor, John Good, who was as generous as Queen Elizabeth I. As a nearer neighbour, if it's possible to pay less than zero, that's what he did. In fact, it was funded largely by the Bishop of London, and I'm going to have to check my notes here to get the name right, Thomas Ravis, and his coat of arms is up here in the window. And Thomas Ravis and his wife not only donated funds to the church, but they went around gathering funds from other places, from places like London Diocese, from the county of Middlesex. They all donated to rebuild this church because our local Lord of the Manor would do nothing. So we have this new church, this red brick church, thanks to their generosity. And if you had entered the church in 1611, you would have recognized that building if you'd then come back again in the middle of the 19th century. For nothing really had changed except dilapidation. So by the 1840s, the church was in a very poor state, and so they decided to carry out works. Is there a church warden here? How many church wardens have we got in the room? At least one, I know. Okay, right, hiding now. You might want to, yeah, okay. This may seem amazing to everyone here, but church politics seems to have interfered a little bit. The records are testimony to the kind of tensions in meetings between clergy, wardens, the vestry, which was the precursor of the parochial church council, and prominent members of the congregation. PCC meetings would take opposing views depending on who was in the chair. Can you imagine such tensions in a parish today? Extraordinary. The most significant member of the congregation was Thomas Weeding, whose memorial is here. And Thomas Weeding, by 1850, owned half of the land in the parish. He was a wealthy man. And as a wealthy man, he offered to pay for renovations to the church. He offered to take out the old pews and replace them with box pews. Now, given at this point, some of the pews in this church were tree trunks that had been sawn in half. So we're talking a significant improvement by putting in box pews. And taking down, the chancel screen was taken down, the screen here was taken down and turned into flooring and a desk for reading. The entrance to the church, I don't know if you walked around here, you may have noticed there's a blind door just here. That was the south entrance to the church. That was the porch was demolished, the entrance was bricked up, and people started coming in under the tower. So this is all very good, depending on your perspective. Mr. Trevelyan was the vicar at the time, and he struggled with Mr. Weeding and objected to many of the innovations that he had brought in. So the new box pews, how generous of him to do that, except he then allocated them to his own family and to his tenants, so that there were fewer seats in the church for the congregation, and certainly a lot less for the poor. Now, Mr. Weeding didn't see this as a problem, or at least it was only a problem if, and I quote, the poor wished to come to church. There was a fireplace, a new fireplace to give warmth to the building, just about where I'm standing here. That smoked so much it couldn't be used. The box pews had locks on them that rattled so much that they interrupted the service. And church wardens, no faculty had been obtained. The Reverend George Trevelyan lived for a further 2 years, dying at the age of 47, and one can't help wondering whether having to work alongside Thomas Weeding in that period had shortened his life somewhat. So sadly, George Trevelyan's legacy of a restored St. John's was referred to in the middle of the 20th century by the chronicler of the history of Malden, Kenneth Ross, in the following terms: the restoration was in fact most lamentable. So, whoever followed Mr. Trevelyan into the living of St. John's Old Malden was going to have some work to do, wasn't he?
Your store
We cannot talk about the rebuilding of St. John's Old Malden in 1875 without talking about William Chetwynd Stapleton. William Chetwynd Stapleton came from an aristocratic background. He arrived at St. John's in 1850 and expected to spend 2 years as vicar of this parish. He stayed for 44. The job was advertised in 1849 and was supposed to go to a fellow of Merton College. As you remember, Merton College was founded through the establishment of the House of Scholars next door. But no one would take it because of its, and I'm quoting here, neglected and dilapidated state. It was in such a bad state that ivy was coming in through the roof and going over the heads of the congregation sitting here. Ivy was so rampant on the outside of the church that it was a tradition that young boys would be sent up the ivy covering the tower to get the eggs from the chickens' nests where the chickens were roosting in the ivy on the tower. The churchyard was covered in brambles. Is Graham here? Graham Burley would never allow that to happen. And not only that, but the roads were in a deplorable state. Who could imagine? And of course, there was all that work from 1848 to undo, those box pews, that stove in the middle. All of those things needed to be addressed. And William Chetwynd Stapleton was made of sterner stuff than his peers, who couldn't face the parish. He came here because he felt, I'm going to quote him now, he felt that the parish in which the founder of Merton College, Walter de Merton, had placed a house of priests and scholars from which Merton arose at Oxford ought to be supplied, if possible, by a rector from the college. And so he took up the living. Yeah. Thomas Weeding had been a thorn in the side of Mr. Trevelyan for a lot of years, and his ability to get on the wrong side of the incumbent was a skill that he carried over to the ministry of William Chetwynd Stapleton. Arriving in the parish, Chetwynd Stapleton found, of course, that there were locks on the pews, something that he considered illegal, so he employed a carpenter to remove them. Mr. Weeding was furious and unloaded a tirade of abuse against Chetwynd Stapleton, and Chetwynd Stapleton did the worst thing that he could have done in the face of that onslaught. He smiled. And then he informed Mr. Weeding that if Mr. Weeding replaced them, he would simply get the carpenter back and they would be removed. Mr. Weeding, the most significant landowner in the parish, the most important, if we want to work with that word, member of the congregation, stopped coming to church. For a little while, anyway. Interestingly, he started coming back to church more often than he had prior to the argument. So not quite sure what was going on in his mind there. And there is an interesting incident where the two men found themselves working together. For those who don't know, we have the Hogsmill River just down at the back of the churchyard here, where Millet painted Ophelia. Now, that's beautifully bucolic and a lovely image to hold, but further up the Hogsmill, there was gunpowder mill after gunpowder mill. In 1742, two of them exploded with such force they shattered glass in the church, and the local people thought that an earthquake had happened. Well, in 1854, there was another explosion, not as dramatic as that, but it certainly rattled the windows in the church, and it was enough to get William Chetwynd Stapleton and Thomas Weeding working together. The two of them petitioned to have the gunpowder mills closest to the road closed. Now, I don't know whether Providence looked down with some startlement at these two men actually working together, But the Worcester Park gunpowder mill was closed in 1584, in 1854 even, the right way round there. So the parish was much safer because the two of them worked together. But it's hard to see how Thomas Weeding could be brought round to undoing the restoration of the church that he had paid for previously. At the end of the last bit of narrative, I said that it was difficult to see how Thomas Weeding would agree to undoing the restorations that he had paid for in the 1840s. Thomas Weeding died in 1856. He is buried in the family vault out there, and his memorial in the church, I'm not going to go and read it up, it's easier to read it on the bit of paper. I'm going to read to you what is said about Thomas Weeding. That his benevolent and sweet disposition, elegant mind, never failing charity and simple piety endeared him to all classes, which presumably includes even the poor who wish to come to church. One can't help wondering if it was with just a little bit of relief that William Chetwynd Stapleton presided over the interment of Thomas Weeding's mortal remains. Chetwynd Stapleton's attention then turned to the interior and what he could do about the interior. Bearing in mind we're still talking about that building there, the red brick building, and trying to undo the disastrous reformations from 1848. First thing, the box pews went and replaced by the pews that you're sitting in now. The simple deal pews were replaced with the box pews. The font, which had stood in the middle of the aisle, was moved under the tower into a baptistry, and an arch was installed between the chancel and the nave there, the oak arch you can see there. But most significantly, thinking about how the people experienced worship in the church, there had previously been a ceiling, and that was removed to expose the rafters. Now imagine the change in the space and the sound, how everything would change by simply removing that ceiling. Having restored the interior by 1866, it was time to turn the attention to the very fabric of the building itself. The parish had grown significantly over the preceding decades, and the small 17th century church over there really just wasn't big enough anymore. In a major alteration to the shape of the church, the north wall, so between these arches here, was removed. And between 1866 and 67, a lean-to aisle was put in where we are now. Now, whilst the church was altered in that way, and that's a significant change to the building, we mustn't forget that actually that still left the altar table where it had been standing for 1,000 years. So that did not change when the first alterations to the building happened in 1866 to 1867. But even when the new building was opened on January the 13th, 1867, they had already planned to do much greater works and to construct a new nave and chancel as we see them today. As with other suburbs of London, Malden in the 1840s had gained its railway station at New Malden, and that provided a growth in population, and when in 1870, Malden became Old Malden, because now New Malden was significant enough for us to be contrasted with it. So, the foundation stone for a new nave and chancel were laid on the 26th of June 1875 by the suffragan Bishop of Guildford for the new nave of the Church of St. John the Evangelist. When I'm doing my job as a professional storyteller without bits of paper in my hand, for me the best storytelling is conversational storytelling, where the audience responds as I'm telling my story. So I loved the fact when I said the dedication of the church of St. John the Evangelist, there was an "oh," and I sat down and Janet gave me a face. Because the foundation stone of this new building here was laid with a cavity in it, and in the cavity there was a bottle, and in the bottle there's coins from the period, and a scroll, and on the scroll are the names of significant people who contributed in some way or another to the building of this church, and it is dedicated on that to St. John the Evangelist. And William Chetwynd Stapleton didn't find out that that was wrong until 1887. 37 years into his ministry, he found out that this was the Church of St. John the Baptist. So on the 7th of December 1875, the Bishop of Winchester consecrated the building. It took under 6 months to build. Yes, those people who are involved in the Restore project might want to think about that. Yeah, sorry about that. So after 1,000 years of services being celebrated from the East End of first a Saxon church and then a Jacobean church from the 17th century, the celebration of Holy Communion was moved to the East End of this new building. And to mark the altar table's historic position, there is a tablet. Do go and have a look, and it says, "Here stood the Lord's table on Malden, the hill of the cross, for well nigh 1,000 years, until the consecration of the new chancel, December the 7th, 1875. In 1893, before Chetwynd Stapleton departed from this parish, the old chancel was dedicated as the Lady Chapel, and a new reredos and altar table were installed in memory of his late wife Elizabeth, his wife who had supported him in his ministry throughout their married lives. The cost of the alterations were by no means small amounts for the time. The nave and chancel cost, are you ready? £3,026. £3,026. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I invite you to go and explore it if you've never looked at it, the Bank of England provides a website which calculates the value of money based on inflation. And you can go back to the 13th century to find out how much money was worth then and now. So in 1875, £3,026 is the equivalent for today of £301,000, which is still cheap, isn't it? And think about the bill we're facing to just keep this building up now, many times that. But of course, the costs of labour in that time were a lot cheaper, and for some reason, we want to pay people fairly these days and make sure that they can do so safely. So it's going to be a lot more expensive than it was in those days. And Chetwynd Stapleton gave a lot to this parish. He gave 40 years of his ministry, of his life, over 40 years, and he either donated himself or was involved in the raising of £12,393 for the parish, which again, thank you Bank of England website, now that is 1.2 million, which is an indication of how wealthy some clergy were in the 19th century. Father Michael isn't here to comment. Billy, do you feel you want to deputise for Michael at this point to comment on that? No? Okay. William Chetwynd Stapleton left the parish of St. John the Baptist, Old Malden, in 1894 following the death of his wife. And he retired to Royal Tunbridge Wells, which strikes me as a very good place to retire to, and he died there in 1919. Now, the mosaics behind the altar table here were a donation of his children in his memory in 1921. And it's not only a mark of the love of his children for him, but also of the parish that they wanted a memorial in such a prominent place. So here we are, St. John's. As those of us who are regulars here, and even those of you who are occasional visitors here, this is what we have now, after the work of William Chetwynd Stapleton. And I know that I am a newbie. I am a newcomer to this parish. I've only been here 20 years. But we have to remember that William Chetwynd Stapleton and Thomas Graham Jackson, that was the architect, both of them were products of their time. Chetwynd Stapleton was a member of the Oxford movement, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar with ecclesiological terminology, refers to a group concerned with re-establishing the medieval rituals of the worship of the church and what we sometimes shorthand to Anglo-Catholicism. And it's thanks to the Oxford movement that we have the church in the shape that it is, that wants us to perform liturgies in particular ways, so that from the Oxford movement, from the Anglo-Catholic movement, we have a robed choir, we have incense, we have an altar at the east end. So William Chetwynd Stapleton and Thomas Jackson were creating a building that kind of worship could take place in. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was chatting to Barry at the Christian Aid breakfast, and I think I worried him when I pointed out that, this is an Anglo-Catholic building, and I'm a Protestant. And I have little personal sympathy with this kind of thing, to be honest, with that kind of approach. And it appears that I wasn't alone. Because when Chetwynd Stapleton was minister here, he dared to think that he might get a new robe to preach in. To which the church warden replied, "The thin end of the wedge towards popery." So, I'm not treading a new path here by being a Protestant. But whatever my tastes in Christian worship may be, Chetwynd Stapleton was acting out of a desire that the people of Malden should be able to offer worship to God in a way that was fitting. And let's face it, he built a healthy church community through his long ministry. When he first arrived here, he was lucky to have 7 people in the congregation. Sometimes he had to send a messenger to get the church wardens out of their houses, because otherwise he wouldn't have enough people to legally celebrate services. When, in 1869, communion was celebrated on Easter Day, rather than 7, he had 109 communicants. So while William Chetwynd Stapleton was laid to rest in our graveyard, the true memorial to him is this building. And of course, as part of that, the mosaic behind the altar. And notice that the mosaic behind the altar depicts the scenes of the Annunciation, the birth of Jesus, and Christ enthroned in glory. It does not depict William Chetwynd Stapleton. There are no images glorifying that person in this church. Instead, we have this building as a living memorial to his ministry, a memorial that sustains the life of the people of God in this place, and provides a place of beauty and calm and rest for the local community. It's an historic building, but we have adapted to the 21st century. We have a coffee lounge and meeting rooms. We have modern heating. We have a kitchen. We have adaptations to make it accessible. We have dimmable electric lighting. We even have internet access in this church. But still, it remains William Chetwynd Stapleton's vision for the building. So, here is to the next 150 years, to adapting to the future and whatever that may hold for this community, and remembering to keep the best of the past.
Wasn't that splendid? Absolutely wonderful. I got a little bit emotional at that last one because I can remember sitting with Linda Salter there trying to learn the alto part many years ago. It's very hard. Wouldn't Chetwynd Stapleton be delighted to know that this enlarged church is still being used for such excellent singing and worship? And we just want to thank you so much, particularly Barry, who actually thought up this whole programme. It is, of course, in aid of the Restore Fund, as you can imagine. And when you come through to have some refreshments, which I hope you will in a minute, lots of refreshments, you will see pictures on the wall of what needs doing and so on. So we have got quite a lot of money to raise. Thank you for everything, coming, listening, singing, wonderful. Interestingly enough, next Sunday, at our 9:45 service, Father Michael Roper, our vicar, who's actually away on his annual leave, but he'll be back, is going to take a BCP service, which would have happened when Chetwynd Stapleton was here. And of course it means that the altar would be pushed back to the wall, and he will face east, back. We'll just see his back, and it'll be like it was in the Victorian times, which might be quite interesting, very different from the worship we have today. So that's next Sunday. Do feel free to come. And as Barry has pointed out, in December, on the 7th, we are having a choral evensong at the actual anniversary of the consecration of the nave. So do come along to that. And then there's his organ recital, which we mustn't miss either, in October.
Of the period.
Of the period. So that'll be good. Thank you once again, all of you, and please come through and have some refreshments.
Right, Staple. Simon, can you just come out again?